In 2026, the rules for entering and staying in the United States are changing faster than ever before. New immigration decisions under President Donald Trump are already affecting millions of people across the world, from families waiting to reunite, to workers hoping for opportunity, to undocumented immigrants living in fear of sudden enforcement. Many people still don't know what these new rules really mean, who is allowed to enter the U.S., and who may be forced to leave. In this video, we break down the real facts behind the latest U.S. immigration policies, what has already changed, and how these decisions could impact lives worldwide. Since the start of 2026, the United States has seen some of the most significant changes to its immigration policy in decades under the administration of President Donald Trump. These changes affect how people around the world can enter, stay in, or be removed from the United States, reshaping both legal immigration pathways and enforcement actions. At the core of these developments are expanded restrictions on visas, increased enforcement measures, and executive directives intended to tighten control over who can come into the country and who must leave. One of the most consequential actions taken in early January 2026 was the indefinite suspension of immigrant visa processing for citizens of more than 75 countries. Under this policy, officials from the U.S. State Department announced that the processing of immigrant visas, the visas that allow people to move to the United States permanently, would be paused for nationals of these countries pending further review. These measures were justified by the administration as necessary to prevent new immigrants from becoming a public charge, which is a term used to describe non-citizens who are likely to rely on public benefits or government assistance. The suspension is not limited to a fixed period and could remain in effect until the administration completes its reassessment of vetting procedures for these applicants. This policy does not apply to temporary visas, such as tourist, business, or student visas, and lawful permanent residents holding valid visas can still enter the country. However, the pause severely limits the ability of eligible families and workers from those countries to move permanently to the United States and join relatives or pursue opportunities there. In addition to the visa suspension, the government has continued to implement an expanded travel ban that affects both immigrant and non-immigrant admissions from a growing list of countries. Initially introduced in previous years, this ban has been broadened to cover a diverse group of nations across Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia. Nationals from some of the countries on the list now face full suspension of visas, while others face partial restrictions. In practical terms, this means that for affected nations, many categories of visas may be unavailable, and people seeking to travel to, work in, study in, or reunite with family in the United States will find legal pathways significantly limited or entirely blocked. The Trump administration has also rolled out new measures aimed at encouraging undocumented immigrants currently in the United States to leave voluntarily. One such program, known as Project Homecoming, offers cash incentives to individuals without legal status who choose to depart the country on their own. The Department of Homeland Security more than doubled the amount offered for voluntary departure, aiming to reduce the costs associated with formal deportations. Federal officials reported that hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants have used this program, though the figures and effectiveness of the initiative have been subject to debate. Critics argue that the incentive program can be misleading and may not deliver on its promises for all participants, but the administration maintains that it has contributed to a reduction in unlawful presence and has helped decrease encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border. While the emphasis on voluntary departure is one approach, enforcement operations carried out by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, have also intensified in parallel. There have been multiple reports and incidents involving controversial ICE actions, including aggressive raids and detentions. In some communities, federal immigration agents have been reported to have conducted operations targeting specific populations and neighborhoods with increased frequency and force. One such controversial occurrence involved the detention of a 5-year-old child and his father in Minnesota after an ICE operation, which drew sharp criticism from local officials and immigrant rights advocates. Such enforcement actions have heightened tensions and raised concerns about the treatment of families and children in the context of immigration enforcement. Another notable element of enforcement policy comes from internal guidance reportedly circulated within ICE. According to news reports, ICE has issued memos advising agents that they can enter private residences without a judge-signed warrant in order to arrest individuals with final orders of removal, relying instead on administrative warrants signed by ICE officials. Traditionally, law enforcement has been expected to obtain judicial warrants for such entries to satisfy Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Legal experts and civil liberties organizations have criticized this approach as potentially unconstitutional and a violation of long-standing protections, although the Department of Homeland Security defends the use of administrative warrants under immigration law. The immigration policy changes in 2026 are not limited to enforcement and visas alone. Broader executive directives signed by President Trump in previous years continue to shape the legal framework. For example, an executive order titled Protecting the American People Against Invasion directed federal agencies to expand expedited removal procedures, which allow for the summary deportation of non-citizens without full court hearings, and to impose penalties on jurisdictions that restrict local cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. This executive order reflects an overarching effort to centralize and strengthen federal immigration authority. Some parts of this order and similar directives have faced legal challenges in federal court, with judges issuing injunctions to block portions that conflict with state and civil liberties protections. Beyond the United States, these immigration changes have had ripple effects around the globe. Countries with large diasporas in the U.S. continue to watch developments closely as families wait to reunite, workers seek job opportunities, and students pursue education. The heightened restrictions have also had economic implications, especially in sectors that rely on immigrant labor, such as agriculture, construction, and technology. While some supporters of the policy argue that stricter immigration rules protect American jobs and national security, opponents stress that these changes disrupt lives, separate families, and strain international relations. In response to these policy shifts, grassroots organizations and immigrant advocacy groups across the United States have mobilized to offer support, legal guidance, and community assistance. Community networks have organized to provide Know Your Rights trainings, monitor ICE activity, and assist families affected by deportations and enforcement operations. These efforts aim to ensure that immigrants and their families are aware of their legal options, have access to representation when possible, and can navigate the complex immigration landscape during a time of rapid change. In summary, the immigration landscape in the United States in 2026 reflects a shift toward more restrictive policies under President Donald Trump's administration. Legal pathways to immigration have been narrowed through visa suspensions and expanded travel bans. Enforcement within the United States has increased, and programs encouraging voluntary departure have become more prominent. At the same time, many of these policies face legal challenges and strong public debate. For millions of migrants and their families around the world, understanding these developments is crucial as they evaluate their options for travel, work, family reunification, or in early 2026, the United States is experiencing one of the most extensive overhauls of its immigration policy in recent history. Under the administration of President Donald J. Trump, a series of new rules, executive actions, and enforcement measures have reshaped how people around the world can enter the United States, seek legal status, or remain within the country. These policies touch on every stage of immigration, from visas and permanent residency to enforcement within U.S. borders. One of the most prominent and consequential changes involves the suspension of immigrant visa processing for citizens of 75 countries. In January 2026, the U.S. State Department announced an indefinite pause on issuing immigrant visas to applicants from these nations. Immigrant visas are the visas that allow individuals to move to the United States permanently, whether to reunite with family, work, or settle long-term. The decision affects a broad range of countries from regions including Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Official statements from the State Department describe the suspension as part of a reassessment of visa procedures to prevent the entry of people who might become dependent on public assistance after arrival in the U.S. This visa suspension does not apply to non-immigrant visas such as tourist, student, or temporary business visas, which remain largely unaffected for most travelers. However, the pause dramatically limits legal pathways for people seeking to build a future in the United States through family reunification or employment-based avenues. The administration's justification centers on a long-standing provision of U.S. immigration law that bars admission to individuals likely to become a public charge, or someone likely to rely primarily on government benefits. Yet implementing this restriction on such a wide scale marks a significant tightening of who can legally immigrate to the U.S. At the same time, the U.S. has significantly expanded its travel ban policies. Originally introduced in earlier years, these bans now cover multiple countries and restrict entry for people from many nations deemed high risk or ineligible for visas under national security and public charge criteria. These policies have been implemented through presidential proclamations and regulatory changes that directly affect who can enter the United States and under what conditions. Extended travel bans have made it more difficult for foreign nationals from specific regions to secure visas or access legal entry options. Alongside changes to visa issuance, the administration has also intensified enforcement within the United States. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, has been operating under new internal guidance that has stirred controversy among legal experts and civil liberties advocates. Reports obtained by news outlets reveal that ICE memoranda instruct agents they may enter private homes to arrest individuals with final removal orders using administrative warrants rather than warrants issued by a judge. Traditionally, judicial warrants have been required for home entry to honor Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Critics argue that relying on administrative documents for such entries undermines constitutional rights, while supporters within the agency maintain that immigration law allows for these practices under specific conditions. Enforcement operations go beyond home entries. Homeland Security officials have launched campaigns targeting undocumented immigrants that include increased police presence in cities, workplace raids, and expanded detention networks across multiple states. Local and national civil liberties groups report heightened confrontations between immigration officers and communities, including U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, who say they have been stopped or questioned based on their appearance or perceived ethnicity. These reports describe patterns of enforcement that have sowed fear in minority neighborhoods and raised serious concerns about racial profiling. Although immigration authorities deny such claims and say their actions are grounded in immigration law, community advocates and legal experts continue to challenge these practices as unconstitutional. In addition to enforcement, the Trump administration has introduced incentive-based programs designed to encourage undocumented immigrants to leave the United States voluntarily. One such initiative, often referred to in government communications as Project Homecoming, increased cash payments offered to undocumented individuals who choose to depart on their own. This program raised the incentive amount to approximately $2,600 per person and repurposed digital tools initially designed for asylum seekers to facilitate voluntary departures. Officials have reported that millions of undocumented immigrants have left the country under this scheme in the past year. However, investigative reporting from independent media and immigration advocacy groups has questioned the accuracy of these numbers and highlighted issues, including unfulfilled payments, misleading information provided to participants, and concerns about the long-term consequences of accepting voluntary departure, such as lifetime restrictions on re-entry. The enforcement and voluntary departure strategies operate within a broader legal and political context. Several new executive orders related to immigration signed by President Trump in 2025 continue to influence policy in 2026. One executive order, for example, aimed to expand expedited removal procedures, which permit the deportation of non-citizens without full administrative hearings. Other executive actions sought to limit sanctuary jurisdiction protections, penalize local governments that do not cooperate fully with federal immigration enforcement, and challenge established interpretations of birthright citizenship. Some of these executive orders have been blocked or limited by federal courts due to constitutional challenges, but they reflect the administration's push toward a more restrictive immigration regime. The legal system has also played a critical role in shaping the contours of immigration policy under the current administration. Federal judges have issued rulings that check or constrain aspects of immigration enforcement when they conflict with constitutional protections or statutory limits. In one notable case, a federal judge warned the administration against altering the immigration status of non-citizen plaintiffs involved in a First Amendment lawsuit, citing concerns about retaliation against political expression. This ruling underscored the judiciary's role in safeguarding civil liberties amid expansive enforcement measures. These immigration policy shifts have had broad consequences for people worldwide. Families separated by delayed or suspended immigrant visas face long waits with little certainty about when they may reunite. Skilled workers and students are navigating new rules and potential restrictions on work visas or non-immigrant travel. Asylum seekers and refugees have faced stricter eligibility criteria and reduced access to legal pathways. The cumulative impact of these changes is felt in communities across continents, particularly in regions where emigration to the United States has long been a vital economic and social lifeline. At the same time, debates about immigration continue within the United States itself. Supporters of the administration's policies argue that stricter enforcement, expanded vetting, and reduced legal immigration help protect national security, reduce government spending on public assistance, and prioritize opportunities for American citizens. Opponents counter that the new policies undermine the United States' historical role as a destination for immigrants, separate families, and jeopardize basic human rights and constitutional freedoms. For millions of people watching from abroad, understanding these developments is crucial. Whether seeking to visit the United States, work, study, or seek refuge, individuals must now navigate a complex and rapidly evolving immigration system. These changes illustrate how deeply immigration remains intertwined with questions of law, security, and national identity, and how policy decisions made in Washington reverberate across the globe. Permanent settlement in the United States. In the